Hello, my name is Klein, and I'm the Executive Director of the Juvenile Justice Initiative. I would like to thank both of our panelists, Suzanne Saulsberry from the Woods Fund Chicago and Nate Balis from the Annie E. Casey Foundation for joining this discussion today. Your two foundations have been the local and national leaders in reforms to protect children and young adults in conflict with the law, basing reforms on science and international human rights and best practices for public safety. We're grateful to you for your unfailing commitment to children's rights. Now to introduce the panel. Suzanne Saulsberry is a proud native of Chicago's South Side and a feminist advocate who is passionate about civic engagement, racial, gender, and economic equity, LGBTQ rights, and individual and community empowerment. Her professional experience has been primarily in the nonprofit and public sectors. Before joining Woods Fund Chicago, she was the Director of Policy and Outreach at the City of Chicago's Commission on Human Relations, the city's Civil Rights Department. And before then, she was a Deputy Policy Director in the Chicago Mayor's Office of Rahm Emanuel, where she worked on issues such as affordable housing, homelessness, and transportation in underserved neighborhoods in the city's South and West Sides. She's also worked in nonprofit organizations where she directed and managed civic engagement, advocacy, and public programming initiatives. Nate Balis is the director of the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. He leads the JJI network of juvenile justice practitioners in 40 states and over 300 counties, which is working to build a better and more equitable youth justice system. Through his leadership, the foundation has launched several youth justice initiatives, including JDAI Connect, an online community accelerating youth justice reforms across and beyond the JDAI network through peer-to-peer learning, training, and resources. With 2 decades of experience in youth justice, social policy, and research, Nate has expanded Casey's reform efforts beyond juvenile detention to deep end reform, ending the youth prison model, and fundamentally transforming juvenile probation. Through the deep end work, which he initiated, the foundation has early evidence that public systems can safely and significantly reduce all forms of out-of-home placement, especially for youth of color. As director, he continues to push innovation, for example, expanding diversion from formal justice system involvement and increasing the role of youth families and communities in reform, including the creation of a youth advisory council to shape Casey's approach. In 2019, Maryland's governor appointed Nate to the state's Juvenile Justice Reform Council for a 2-year term. A native of Maryland, he earned a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree from Franklin and Marshall College. Now, as the home of the world's first juvenile court, Illinois was once a national and international leader in juvenile justice reform. However, Illinois and the rest of the US now struggle to comply with the rights of children set forth in the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, or CRC, as the US is now the only nation in the world to fail to ratify the CRC. Over the past 2 decades, JJI's advocacy has resulted in significant progress towards ensuring our justice system incorporates the basic human rights for children set forth in the CRC, including raising the upper age from 17 to 18, decreasing confinement, and reducing adult prosecution of children. As we look ahead, we're eager to have your input on what is essential to ensure that all our children are treated humanely and equally. So the first question goes to Kelly. The Woods Fund has been a partner of JJI since our beginning in 2000. We are especially grateful for your commitment to ensure the voices of impacted persons and community is included in our policy development and advocacy. Over the past 2 decades, JJI has consistently included the voices of impacted persons and family members on our board, and has been in coalition with impacted community organizations. And we find that these partnerships and leaders bring a personal and moral imperative to our work that is the core of our advocacy. Can you share the vision of the Woods Funds for transformative justice through your grantees and partners?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you, Louis and JJI, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be in conversation with you and Nate. And I just would just like to say that, Woods Fund is really proud to, partner with and support the really transformational work that a lot of our grantee partners, including JJI, are doing. One is understanding that juveniles, youth, are people, right? And there is a real criminalization of a lot of youth, especially young people or youth, that's redundant, but youth of color, poor and working class youth, youth who've been involved in the criminal legal system. And our system has, our grantee partners are saying that, our society has taken a very approach, often has refused to invest on the front end in terms of access to quality food, access to behavioral supports and services, and the types of supports that parents and guardians and families need so that they can actually raise and support healthy, well-adjusted children. And so, a lot of youth, unfortunately, are facing all kinds of trauma in their families, in their neighborhoods. It's easy for some of them to succumb to, things that are happening, in the streets in their neighborhoods. And then so when they get in conflict with the law, there's an automatic criminalization that occurs that can really like follow them for the rest of their lives. And so what a lot of our grantee is one, in their work, thinking more holistically about the lives of young people. What do they need to be healthy and whole people? And they're also saying it's important to do this work, but where are the youth voices? And particularly, where are the youth voices who have been impacted by the juvenile system? And really not only listening to them, but respecting their leadership, respecting their lived experiences, the importance of having their voices be a part of the organizing and advocacy work, and really looking at and just incarcerating youth instead of just criminalizing them. How do we really, one, support, how do they slash we, as human beings in general, support them on the front end? And then if they do get in conflict with the youth, what with the criminal legal system, what are the different supports that they can provide so that they can go on and live lives and not have a scarlet letter over their heads for the rest of their lives? So a lot of the work our grantee partners are doing has to do a lot more with a holistic way of living instead of just punishing.
Thank you, Kelly. The second question goes to Nate. Your foundation has been active in Illinois since Cook County participated in the initial pilot of the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. Illinois has now significantly reduced pretrial detention, but most reforms and the more dramatic reductions have been in post-trial commitments to juvenile prison. One reform that we've urged for over a decade is that of a reasonable minimum age of detention. This is a reform whose time has come. International human rights instruments, such as the Convention of the Rights of the Child, called for an end of prosecution, let alone detention of young children under the age of 14. Canada ended prosecution of children under the age of 12 in 1984, and Germany has long ended prosecution of children under the age of 14. And US states are paying attention. The Youth Correctional Leaders and the American Bar Association have both recommended setting 14 as the lower age of juvenile court. Can you tell us why the Annie Casey Foundation supports reducing the detention of young children?
Yeah, sure. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this today, and so excited about the work that JJI does. So just being included on this panel is a real honor, and talking about this in particular is something I'm excited to do. So I mean, let me just start by saying I agree that there is serious momentum and a need for setting a minimum age for the system. I think we get caught as someone myself who's a data person. You can get caught in the percentages that can show that only a tiny percentage of young people who are in the system are under 13 or under 14 or under 10 or under 7 or under, I mean, when you go state to state and look at what it is, and what that adds up to, though, is oftentimes hundreds and hundreds of children being brought into a system that there is absolutely no reason for them to be in. Everything we know about kids, and a system that's not designed at all to support them and what they need. I have an 11-year-old boy and an 8-year-old boy right now. Just the thought of them being in the juvenile justice system is sort of absurd on its face, and I feel that way about any child. So you mentioned in my bio that I was on this Maryland Juvenile Justice Reform Council, and Maryland, as a state where I live and have lived most of my life, has oftentimes really really fallen behind when it comes to what's happened in juvenile justice reform. This year, after a lot of work by advocates in groups like JJI, groups like that, but we finally passed a whole number of reforms, and one of them was to set a minimum age for arrest at 13. We would have liked it to be higher, but 13. And the only exceptions sets a minimum age at 10 for the most serious violent offenses. And that's not everything we would have wanted, but it was a real achievement in a place that hadn't done this. So I will say, I believe if Maryland can do that, and Maryland may be a blue state, but has never acted like one when it's come to youth justice, I believe that others can do it as well. So let's talk about detention specifically. So that was just about even setting a floor for the system. I think the biggest challenge we have is how to not make detention something that's just thought of as a routine option, something that's available for anyone who we think it ought to be available for. There's a lot of things we can do to restrict its use, not just in the kind of practice approaches that JJI has set, or the sort of small p policies that have been set in states and localities that restrict detention, but also in state policies. Again, in this latest legislative session here in Maryland, restricting the use of detention for children with misdemeanors, violations of probation, and so forth. These are things available and should be in practice everywhere. When we look around the country at the use of detention, on the one hand, you could see the numbers have plummeted over the years. On the other hand, we can also see that over like the period of 2010 to 2019, detention dropped by a lot, something like 40% around the country, the number of cases that included detention, but it dropped by less than the percentage of arrests. And what that tells you is the actual likelihood that a young person who is arrested will be detained went up during that period. So I just want to repeat that. Detention went up per arrest for kids in this country at that time. And that doesn't even speak to the last 2 years. And so I'll just say I'm alarmed by what's been happening around the country in the last couple of years. In the early period of the pandemic, juvenile detention populations dropped through the floor in ways that were unthinkable. More than a 30% drop in all the places we were surveying around the country in 2 months. An urgency that places like JJI have like call for every day, the urgency to get kids out, all of a sudden happened for this one brief period where we're not only restricting who's coming in, but getting them out quickly. But what I can say is after that huge drop and then sustaining at a level, that a population for a year, over the last year, juvenile detention populations on average around the country have shot back up. And we're at a point now where the number of Black youth in particular in custody in detention centers is higher than it was pre-pandemic, even as the number of white youth is still down by more than 20%. So that's what's going on right now. And that should alarm all of us in terms of what's happening. And so I know you're asking about young children, but I think the point for me would be for all children, including young children, it is just too easy to detain them. It is too often considered just another option that we have available to us, and it shouldn't be. We should think of it as a tragic situation. Any person is removed from their home, and it's just not treated that way. I think that's especially the case if we're talking about young children. Detention is no place for kids in general. It certainly is not a place for young kids.
Well, and I think this brings up a conversation about the need for alternatives, right? And in Illinois, we have the Redeploy Illinois program, which there's both a adult and juvenile redeploy, and the juvenile redeploy has been incredibly successful at reducing post-trial incarceration of children, and has in fact led to the closing of three juvenile prisons. So Nate, your foundation recently did some public polling that revealed some strong public support for alternatives and community supports for young people. Can you tell us a little bit about those results?
Yeah, sure. And I think there's a lot to be a lot of things that encouraged me with this polling, and other things that concerned and nervous. But I think that the best parts were how the public imagines responding to young people who get in trouble, and like large majorities of people strongly agree, or somewhat agree with all kinds of ideas. And I like to say some of this in terms of things like Redeploy Illinois are about what they agree to are not just the sort of evidence-based therapies and things that have a proven track record for young people in the system. But I think importantly, there's strong support for the need to provide opportunities for young people that help them thrive. And that's about a lot more than just addressing the challenges that young people have, the needs that they have, but it's also about connecting them to opportunities. So we say something like, ask a question of asking people whether they agree. We know that young people are connected to things like sports, work, school, and community. They're less likely to get in trouble in the law. But some young people may need more support in making these positive connections, especially in communities. These are kids who've broken the law we're talking about. And 86% of people approve. When people think that crime has been going up, 89% of them approve. It doesn't make a difference. When we say young people should be diverted to community-based alternatives that provide them guidance, education, and support, 82% of people agree with that statement. When we say most young people who break the law can be held accountable by their families and communities, not the system, their families and communities, and connected to appropriate community resources, such as mentors and coaches who support them in learning from their mistakes, 65% of people agree with that, including, again, 64% of people who feel that youth crime is increasing. And so I say all that because these are the types of things that, in that case, we're not just talking about that the system could keep kids in the community. This is explicitly saying we can keep most young people out of this system. That even as we are working to make it better, the better option is going to be to keep young people away. We can get people to sign on to that as well. When we talk about what probation should look like, we're again talking about alternatives. To me, like we think about programs, but probation and the approach that it has with young people, that probation officers face is the experience that most young people have when it's the juvenile justice system. And so often, probation is just about enforcing a set of rules to a bunch of kids who already have demonstrated maybe they're not great at following rules. And now we give them a new set of rules through probation and expect them to follow. It makes no sense, no logic behind that. So we say instead, probation officers should be spending their time with youth with serious and repeat offense histories. So part of this is to say probation should not be concerned with the young people that maybe probation wishes it worked with, but probation should be spending their time with youth with serious or repeat arrest histories. They should be emphasizing strong relationships and motivational guidance that supports personal growth, behavior change, and long-term success, not compliance. 85% of people agree with that, including 87% of people who think crime is increasing. So I say all that, like the last one I'll just say is we ask most young people who break the law should have the opportunity to take responsibility for their actions without becoming trapped in a system that hurts them. And we have 78% of people agree with that. And again, including the same number for people who think crime is increasing. So I find all that encouraging. And I'll talk about one more thing that I find encouraging with that, because all of it suggests that there's an understanding that the system is not helping kids as it exists right now, that it needs to change, and that for most young people, we'd be better off keeping them away from it. The one last thing I want to share from that, because I think is especially important in the context of today, where our country has flooded our cities with guns, our communities with guns, and then when young people pick those guns up, we blame them. We blame them, not us as the adults who've made these choices with our leaders, with our policies, and by allowing these guns into our communities, but we blame the young people for picking them up. When we ask a question that gets at what should the response be when a young person has a gun, not necessarily shot somebody, but young people are arrested in possession of the gun, only 10% believe that young person should be locked up for that. And in fact, 41% believe they should either just be given a warning or a fine, and the most likely response is that young people should be put on probation. To me, that's again encouraging that there's some nuance there that we might not give people credit for of what the public believes ought to happen. Even again, we don't need to get stopped on just this violent, non-violent narrative, and understand that all young people deserve a chance, and accountability is important. We should hold young people accountable. That accountability comes through relationships in their lives and through the opportunities that they want to have, not through a system that's holding a set of rules over their heads.
Yeah, and I think that you said a good, you made a really good point there right at the end, right? About accountability, right? And that what this really is about is a question of what does accountability look like? How can it look, and how can it work? And does it have to be punitive? Does it have to go through a punitive justice system? And JJI has long been a champion of a restorative system rather than punitive. Chicago was recently the host of a National Restorative Justice Conference where JJI was an active participant. We've also promoted legislation in Illinois to establish a legal privilege for all communications and restorative justice practices. Kelly, can you share with us what your vision is for a more humane system of justice for our young people?
Well, I'll just say that I share the vision of so many of our grantee partners. I mean, I think that Nate, like I have so much appreciation for the context you provided just now and like real concrete examples, because many of our grantee partners, the transformative justice aspect for them is understanding that one, the difference between accountability and just pure punishment. That's first and foremost. Like there are ways that youth can be held accountable for their actions that do not require just the punitive system of being incarcerated. And then the other aspect of this is that our grantee partners are advocating for is getting people to really understand that the trauma that many youth experience in when they're in the juvenile system, right? And this happens too with older people who are in prison. I think that, sometimes we forget the kind of trauma and violence that takes place even within those particular systems, right? Sometimes it's the guards, it's the staff, it's other people who are incarcerated, whether they're adults or juveniles, and then so it's like re-exposure to trauma, right? And then we expect people to be healthy, functioning, productive youth and citizens when they when they re-enter the broader society, and it just doesn't make any sense. So a lot of our grantee partners are just really, their vision is for us to have a much broader, holistic vision, of what health and wellness looks like, what taking care of children and fostering them and nurturing them, and yes, teaching them accountability, but then also as older people, as adults, not saying, okay, you did this, now you're done, right? You're done and that's it, and we're not going to do anything. We're not going to hold ourselves accountable for to be accountable to the youth in our communities, the youth in our families. And so the transformative aspect of that vision through our grantee partners is just that, and understanding that, when a child, when a juvenile is incarcerated, it doesn't impact just them, but it impacts that entire family. And this is something that I give our grantee partners a lot of credit for. They understand that this is not just an individual experience. That person's parents or family members are impacted emotionally. Sometimes Young people are also earning money for their families, so it can impact them. Sometimes they're helping to take care of people in their families. It impacts that, and so this is something that is not just an individual experience. And so I would say that our grantee partners' vision is to have a very humane and holistic approach to justice. And justice, therefore, isn't just about locking people away, and definitely not young people. It's a waste card of life. It hurts them and it hurts our society.
Nate, same question.
Yeah, I love what Kelly just said. So I don't know. I don't know. I think that's great. I mean, so I think a question about what would make a more humane system. The first part is to see the humanity of the young people and their families, who are so often demonized within the system, seeing the families as the problem, as opposed to families who love their children and need our support. So I'll start there, that if we don't believe in their humanity, and I think this is particularly the case when it comes to Black children, Black boys in particular, in the system, then it's a lot harder to have a humane response than when we see them as deserving of our care, compassion, when we see ourselves as our job is to help them sort of pursue their hopes and dreams, as opposed to just how do we stop them from doing this bad thing. That's when the system can become more humane. I think part of it is, and Kelly's really hitting on this, is listening to them, listening to what young people say that they want. And I think that when we hear about what they want, one thing is that it's not just the system itself and what it does and doesn't do, it's the range of systems around them that too often fail them. And the juvenile justice system only seems to sort of expedite that in a way. They want schools that, rather than pushing them out, are seeing their role as helping them grow and connecting them to opportunities and ideas that they wouldn't otherwise have. To me, when I think of what it means to be more humane, again, is seeing that the role of the system, if a young person gets there, is not just to help them survive adolescence, survive their time that they've been in the system, but to help them thrive. And if that's going to happen, if we're going to have that type of believing in that, and that's what humanity means, then it also needs to be acknowledgement that the system cannot do this by itself. So when Kelly's talking about her grantee partners who are out there doing this, system needs to see it as mandatory that it's partnering with community organizations, supporting those who are actually helping young people and who will be there after these kids are out of the juvenile justice system. We don't want them in the system. So I feel like all of those things are there. And again, just going back, that I think as long as incarceration, whether it's in Illinois state juvenile correctional facilities or it's local juvenile detention centers, as long as it is seen as just another option on a list of things that can happen at any hearing, as long as we see it that way, I think that puts a big dent in what we mean by believing in people's humanity. It should scare us and alarm us, and we should see it as the tragedy it is every time a young person is removed from their home and put in an institution. And so whether that should never ever happen, or it should happen so rarely that each time it happens that we are faced with this as being as the huge decision that it is, we're not there. And it's not just Illinois that's not there. We're not there as a country. And to me, humanity means that we see the gravity of that decision to take kids out of their homes and put them in institutions as what it should be.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Kelly, Nate, on behalf of the juvenile justice advocacy community, thank you for your time, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your continued commitment to the rights of children. It really means a lot to us for you to continue doing this work. So thank you again very much
Thank you.
for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.